the first one just is so sad. Teenagers who abort are 10 times more likely to try to kill themselves.
Yeah. Wow.
10 times more likely to attempt suicide if they've had an abortion in the last 6 months than teens who have not had an abortion.
Yeah.
And teen suicide rate is already high.
Yeah.
So increase that by 10 times. You can't tell me that abortion is healthy or health care.
I am yours, I am yours, I am yours, send me, Lord. I am yours, I am yours, I am yours.
Welcome to the Gospel-Centered Pro-Life Podcast, a podcast designed to equip, encourage, and challenge you in pro-life ministry, and always with a focus on the gospel. Stay tuned.
I felt your passion, I've touched your heart.
Welcome back to the Gospel-Centered Pro-Life Podcast. Appreciate you guys listening. My name is Daniel Parks. I serve as the Sidewalk Outreach Director for our Sidewalk Outreach Ministry nationally, and also I serve as the West Coast Regional Shepherd for Love Life, overseeing all of our stuff from the Rockies West. It's pretty cool what the Lord is doing on the West Coast. And I'm joined in this podcast, as always, by Vicki Casiorg, our Sidewalk Outreach Training Director. So say, hey, Vicki.
Hey, everyone. Good to be here.
And yeah, it is good to be here. It's good to pour into you guys. It's good to know that there are people that are listening. We've gotten some feedback and gotten some emails and messages from folks that have been encouraged by our episodes and have asked some questions about just how to be effective on the sidewalk. It's why we do these episodes, so we can help you guys to be as effective as possible, keep you guys encouraged, and take what we've learned and pour it into you guys. That's why we do these episodes. And we also like to share what God's doing on the sidewalk. And so we're actually gonna get into something in our kind of main segment, talking about teen abortion risks. Our Youth for Life prayer walk is coming up in just a couple of weeks after you guys are listening to this episode, and I'll be focusing on teens and just youth going after God and being out in front of their abortion centers in their cities, praying and worshiping the Lord. And I feel like it's kind of fitting for us to talk about some of the risks that teens face with abortions, so that some of you young folks that are maybe listening to this episode, or some of you older folks that have young folks that are serving the Lord in this capacity, can just help others in your sphere, in your circle of friends, to understand these risks. And so thought this would be a good opportunity to cover that subject. But before we get into that, Vicki, we have a story that you wanted to share, something that happened here locally, and then springboard off of that with a little bit of training and just encouraging folks how to deal with similar situations to what you dealt with a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. Actually, it was just this Monday.
Wow.
This just happened this week. So I was doing what I do. I was there early on the sidewalk, and I had just started using the microphone. And when I arrived, there were...
So I'm going to give a little context, because not everybody knows what we're talking about, or not everybody has been to Charlotte and knows the lay of the land. But in Charlotte, we actually have property that's adjacent to the abortion center, so very near the abortion center. And we're able to set up amplified sound. So we have a speaker that can actually project sound into the parking lot of the abortion center, and we're told that we can be heard inside. And so we use that. We used it very strategically. We actually did a podcast episode about the use of amplified sound some time ago, and you guys can check that out when you get a chance. But yeah, that's the context. And then we have a wireless microphone that we connect to that so that we can be out on the sidewalk. So the speaker has to be on our property. This is at least the way that we understood it.
The sound ordinance of the city says it must be 150 feet from the border of the abortion center, which is where it is.
Yeah. And so we have that there. And then, we're on the wireless microphone walking up and down the sidewalk so that people can see our faces, so that we can actually be seen as human beings and not, disembodied voices, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the context, just so you guys are, some of you guys are wondering, amplified sound, like what does that mean?
Yeah.
You may be able to use it in your city if you're not already. You may not. I don't know. You'll have to look into that. we did an episode about it, so listen to it. But yeah, jump back into your story. Sorry.
Yeah, so there was a police car with 2 policemen on the sidewalk when I arrived, which is unusual. They obviously were just waiting, and I don't know, must have been called probably by the pro-abortion group, because that's usually who calls them.
Yeah.
And so I did what I always do. I was walking up and down the sidewalk, and when I would see any of the moms, or maybe they were already in the building, I was speaking over the microphone. And pretty much as soon as I started moving down the sidewalk, both policemen came walking up to me and told me that they needed to talk to me. So I turned off the mic, and they said, "You can't use that. You have to be 150 feet from the abortion center." And I said, "Well, I need to videotape this. Forgive me, officers, but we know that we might need to use this as evidence should there be a disagreement." So I pulled out my phone and I start videotaping the conversation, and they were very gracious about this.
Yeah.
Some of them do argue about that. They
Right.
don't like it, but these guys were pretty gracious about it. And I said, "So now, could you just repeat, since I'm recording us now, what is your concern with what I'm doing?" And they said I couldn't be using a microphone because the sound ordinance for the city says I have to be 150 feet from the border of the abortion center, which is our property next to
Yeah.
the abortion center, but not on the sidewalk. So I said, "Well, I have to respectfully disagree. We've been doing this for years, and we know that the sound ordinance allows us to do that because the sound is being broadcast. The sound has to be broadcast from 150 feet away. This microphone is making no sound.
Yeah.
It's 0 decibels, and we're within the decibel limit that's coming from 150 feet away." And he said, "No, you're wrong. It has to be any equipment associated with the production of sound." And
Yeah.
so I said, "Could you please show me the ordinance?" Because I've read the ordinance many times,
Yeah.
and I knew it didn't say that.
Right.
At least my interpretation of it, and certainly the city's interpretation of it up until that moment.
Yeah.
And so so he said, "Yes, I've got it right here." And he pulls out the ordinance and read it to me. And I then respectfully, in a calm voice, talked with him about why that's not what it said. And it specifically says the portion that is emitting sound has to be at 55 decibels, I think is what it said. And I said that the microphone is not emitting any sound. And we went on for like 5 minutes of me tape recording all of this and kind of circling around. And finally, I said, "Listen, I'm going to abide by what you're asking me to do, but I do disagree, and I will be sending this video to our lawyer to look it over." And they
Yeah.
said, "That's fine." And so I did. I sent the video immediately to our lawyer, and I stayed on the property while talking
Yeah.
on the microphone. And I did explain to the police why I want to walk with the microphone. I talked about how they do need to see my face. The women need to see my face because there's a whole lot more emotion and compassion that is able to be expressed than just through my voice alone.
Yeah.
And I did want them to see someone who was compassionate and
Yeah.
cared about them. Anyway, so I'm about an hour on the microphone on our property, off and on. I mean, sometimes I would just turn the microphone off and do other things. But the police came over to me when I was on the microphone again. And I thought, "Oh, no, now they're going to tell me I'm like
Right.
talking too loud or something."
Yeah.
And they said, "Vicki, could you come here for a second and talk with us?" So I did. And he said, "I want to tell you, you were right. We were wrong. You read the ordinance correctly,
Yeah.
and you were using it correctly." And I'll tell you, I wanted to hug him.
Right. Yeah.
I asked,
So
could-
validating, right? Yeah.
but I knew if I did that, I might get shot. So I asked him if I could shake his hand. He said yes. I shook his hand, and I said, it takes a really big man to admit when you're wrong. And I just want to thank you for that, but also for, I know being a police officer these days is not easy. It has become increasingly difficult, and I recognize that. And I just want to thank you so much for your service.
Yeah.
And that was it. And then I will tell you, though, as I then went walking up and down the microphone speaking, both of them were watching, and you could tell they were listening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And who knows what seeds
Sure.
were planted.
Yeah.
So, that was the story, a really heartwarming story. It was my high for that day. But I think it also is a good lesson, really. I've done it wrong many times, but this time I think I did it right.
Yeah.
And maybe we could springboard off into that this is a tip in maybe how we approach and deal with police.
Yeah. Yeah. Because being out there on the sidewalk, you are likely going to encounter law enforcement.
Right.
Hopefully you don't. Hopefully it doesn't become a distraction for you, but it can be, because Planned Parenthood or a Preferred Women's Health Center or some other, whatever the abortion clinic is, calls the police on you because you're blocking the driveway or standing on their property or whatever other. Most of the time it's just a bunch of lies.
Yes.
They call them out there
Yeah.
for no reason, or you're using amplified sound too loud or whatever they call them on. So it can happen. So just be prepared to deal with the police. And we did do an episode about dealing with the police.
Right.
It's been a while, but search that episode. You can reach out to me, Daniel@lovelife.org, and I'll send you over a link to it if you can't find it, but please look for it first. If you can't find it, let me know. But so we did a whole episode about that, but just to get into some of the just basics of dealing with the police. And we always say this, be respectful, like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They approach you. It's annoying because you're not out there to deal with the police. You're out there to speak to the moms and the dads going into the abortion center.
Right.
You don't want to get distracted by that. So actually, one of the first things is, and this is something we say, and it bears true every time, if you didn't call them, wait for them to approach you.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost never good for you to approach them first because it becomes a distraction. And sometimes the police will just show up. You don't know why they're there. And you go and approach them and you find out they're there for something unrelated, or they're
Right.
there just because they were called, but they had no intention of engaging with you.
Right.
And if you don't approach them, they don't approach you, then no harm, no foul, right?
Yeah.
They're just there and hearing what you're saying, but they're not distracting, because it can be a distraction having to deal with the police.
Yeah.
So wait for them to approach you. That's the first thing. If you didn't call them, wait for them to approach you. If you called them because someone threatened you or whatever, you approach them first. But if you didn't call them, let them approach you. The second thing is, of course, be respectful.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do need to push back, it's helpful for you to know your rights.
Yeah.
It's helpful for you to have read the ordinances, so sound ordinances, leafleting ordinances, anything that has to do with protesting or picketing. It's good for you to know those ordinances. It's impossible to know all of them, but it's good for you, if you can, to know those as best you can.
Yeah.
And if at the end of the day, though, if they're going to double down and they're going to say, actually, you can't do this, like they did with you, like they could have backed away. They knew that you knew the ordinance,
Right.
and they could have said, well, okay, we'll do some research. A lot of times that's what happens if you push back a little bit, and you got to do it very respectfully.
Mm-hmm.
Even like what you did with recording them, like whipping out your phone and sticking it in a police officer's face is not a good thing. You want to
Right.
be respectful even about that, and just say, officer, respectfully, just so you know, we've been encouraged to take video of these interactions just for accountability purposes. So please know I'm going to be videoing, but it's nothing against you. Like
Right.
I'm very
Right.
intentional about that.
Yeah.
So make sure you do that. Be
Yeah.
very respectful. But a lot of times, if you respectfully push back and they know that you know the ordinances, they'll actually say, well, let me do some more research. And you keep doing what you've been doing. In this case, he kind of doubled down and said, no, you can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so you abided, and,
Yeah.
and that's the way to do it. If it's not going to completely shut down what you're doing, then you do need to just listen. I've had plenty of times where I'm using amplified sound and the police officer shows up and says, it's a little too loud. Will you turn it down a notch? I'm not going to go back and forth with him on like, well, how many decibels is it? Because I could say, what's your decimal meter say?
Yeah.
How far away did you measure? Like I could get into all
Yeah.
that stuff and be a jerk
Yeah.
about it. And I could be technically right,
Mm-hmm.
but practically and relationally wrong.
Right.
If he shows up, an officer shows up and says, cut it down a little bit, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to cut it down a little
Yeah.
bit. Now, I'm going to cut it down a really little bit, right? Just maybe one little notch.
Yeah.
If he tells me to shut it all the way off or just where it's barely a whisper, I'll probably push back a little more. But if he
Right.
just says, cut it down or move it 2 feet over that way, okay, whatever. I'll move it 2 feet over that
Right.
way. That's not a big deal for me.
Yeah.
The same way for you, go stand on the property. It's a little bit of a bigger deal, but it's like, I'm not going to argue all day long with you. I'll talk to an attorney about it. And right now I can just step on the property. It's no big deal. So
Yeah.
if you can abide by what they're saying without it being a big deal and really hinder what you're doing, then do that. Document it. And if you have an attorney, reach out to that attorney. If you don't, and you're under Love Life, we actually have attorneys that fight these things on our behalf. So we can definitely get an attorney on that
Yeah.
that situation. We have legal entities in various states and things that can help with those things. So I think beyond that, the fact that the police officer came back again, you could have said, "I told you so," and you could have been a jerk about it.
Right. Yeah.
But that doesn't help.
No.
Because you're building a relationship with them, and they know in the future if something comes up that you're a nice
Mhm.
person, and they
Mhm.
can deal with you, and they can expect for you to be respectful,
Mhm.
which is not what you could say for the pro-abortion opposition. They're
Yeah.
normally pretty they're the anti-police,
Right.
people anyway.
Yeah.
And so if we can just show we're different than that, it's really helpful and helps us to build a good relationship with the police.
Yeah.
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 So that's our story and a little bit of training and some encouragement for you guys. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah.
And now let's jump into kind of the main event here, talking about the teen abortion risks and just helping people to understand these risks and maybe some practical things that
Yeah.
how you can apply these risks and share
we
them.
we print this out. This is not actually an article I wrote as usual. This is an excerpt from ChristianLifeResources.com. And it actually not only has these teen abortion risk facts, which just are so incredibly depressing and sad, but it also has the research at the end of it, so that you can check
There's
for
a lot
yourself.
of footnotes.
There are a lot of footnotes, and that's what the footnotes are. Is these are from studies. These are not just made up facts. These are
Right.
from actual studies of teenagers.
Yeah, studies and stories too, because there's a lot of stories of
Right.
or a lot of situations where teenagers have died
Have
from
died,
abortions, and
yeah.
they cite the articles
Yeah.
where these are shared.
So there is a lot of detail in this, and I really would recommend that you all read this on your own. But there's some, maybe we could take turns kind of citing some of the main ones. The first one just is so sad. Teenagers who abort are 10 times more likely to try to kill themselves.
Yeah. Wow.
10 times more likely to attempt suicide if they've had an abortion in the last 6 months than teens who have not had an abortion.
Yeah.
And teen suicide rate is already high.
Yeah.
So increase that by 10 times. You can't tell me that abortion is healthy or
Yeah.
health care.
Right. Yeah.
And it's particularly devastating to teens.
Yeah. And that's an important statistic to know, especially if you're a young person listening to this and there's people in your friend circles that are considering abortions. You care about your friends. You care about those that you're connected with. This is one of those risks that need to be shared.
Yeah.
Because it's devastating.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. This one is so disturbing to me as a parent. About 40% of teen abortions, almost half, take place with no parental involvement. We're talking sometimes 12 and 13-year-olds.
Right. Yeah.
And there's not a parent. They can get a court injunction, a court order that allows them to have that abortion without the parent's knowledge.
I was just listening to a news podcast this morning, and I'm just going to give a plug for this news podcast. I've talked to you about it. It's called The
I
World
listened
and
to it.
Everything in It.
Yeah.
Did you listen to it this morning?
I don't listen to it every day because I forget about it, so I'm glad you reminded me.
Yeah.
But I have listened to it, and it's good. It's kind of an overview.
Yeah. It's a Christian news podcast. It's pretty much where I get all my news nowadays.
Yeah.
And so I listened this morning, and they were talking about, because they talk about legislation sometimes, pro-life legislation or, other things. And they were talking about Idaho, actually. Idaho had passed a law against. So now, abortion's illegal in Idaho for the most part. There's some exceptions and things, but they've severely limited abortion there. And then they passed a law against taking underage girls across the border to have abortions. Because what's happening is, so like we were in Ontario, Oregon not long ago, where Planned Parenthood opened a facility just across the Idaho-Oregon border because Oregon is favorable to abortion, so that they could get girls from Meridian and Boise and the larger cities in Idaho to come across the border, which is like an hour and a half away, to have abortions there. And also Washington State, same way, the borders there in California. So people are taking underage girls to, across the border. And when I say people, I mean like, friends, maybe a cousin or an aunt, or even like Planned Parenthood and people that have to do with Planned Parenthood are actually shuttling girls across the border to have abortions. Idaho passed a law saying you can't do that. It's illegal to take a girl across the border, an underage girl, without the consent of their parents across the border. To me, it's like
a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer.
Exactly.
Like we're talking about a minor.
Yeah.
You can't take them across state lines for anything without the consent of their parents, you would think, right?
Right.
But especially for abortion with no consent of the parents. And actually, the LGBT organizations and Planned Parenthood, of course, and other pro-abortion organizations are fighting that.
Yeah.
They're fighting that, and they're saying, no, you should be able to take underage girls across the border to Oregon or Washington or to California to have abortions. And so, it's like, it talks about this, parents not having knowledge. Like the Planned Parenthood doesn't want parents to have knowledge of what their kids are doing, especially as it pertains to abortion, because that hurts their bottom line.
Yeah. And the next fact is that these teens risk further injury and even death because they've already done it secretly.
Yeah.
And they don't want to admit to their parents when there's complications. They know something's wrong.
Sure.
But they can't tell their parents. And so then there's a list of all these women who have died, or some, not all, but some of these teens. One is a 13-year-old.
Yeah. I'm going to actually name them out here because this is public knowledge, and so we're not naming somebody out that the public's not aware of.
Yeah.
And I think these names are important because we talk about police brutality, and you name the names of the people that have been brutalized by the police, and we know those names. And the BLM leftist people are not afraid to put those names out there, but they don't like putting these names out here.
No,
these are human beings that have been killed. These girls that they supposedly help. That have been killed by abortion. Holly Patterson in California died at age 18. Dawn Ravenel of New York died at age 13. Erica Richardson in Maryland died at age 16 from an abortion. Tamia Russell in Detroit died at age 15. Sandra Kaiser in St. Louis died at age 14 of a suicide.
Wow.
I mean, and then these are just some of the names. I'm imagining the list is endless and unknown for some of these who've either committed suicide or died by botched abortions.
Right.
And, this notion that abortion is health care, that abortion helps these young women to, establish their career and gives them freedom and freedom of choice and bodily autonomy and all this other nonsense the pro-abortion contingency says. The reality is abortion destroys the lives of children and destroys women. And here's just a few of the names that were affected by abortion in this way.
Yeah. There's a 65% higher risk of clinical depression among women who abort.
Yeah.
65% higher risk of clinical depression. So, it again, the aftermath of abortion is just so terrible, and some things that are true of teens more than adult women getting an abortion. The fact that teens report more acute pain during the abortion, and they found it said one study of pain during the first trimester abortions found severe acute pain comparable to childbirth or cancer. And the scores were significantly higher for teens.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes the result of that is one of the things mentioned earlier in this article is that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, happens in 65% among the women who abort. And so that, the risk of that high level of pain and the PTSD that accompanies that.
Yeah, and keep in mind, guys, because we are going to put this article on our Sidewalks for Life website, that there are citations to be able to check up on the articles and the stories and things that are cited in this article. So that you can fact check this stuff.
Yeah. So higher risk of psychological complications, the physical complications, a higher risk, and including subsequent miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies, ruptured uterus, and death. I mean, these are serious physical complications.
Yeah.
And then later pregnancies, there will be more trouble if the teen has aborted while a teen.
Yeah.
So, grief, trauma, self-destructive outcomes, there's a whole list of those. And what I read, I don't see it in this one. But what I read was that a teen that was being coerced, which is often the case, like in, I think, the last podcast we talked about, the 14-year-old teen that was being coerced by her parents, they do even more poorly than teens that think this is what they want to do.
Yeah.
So, and there probably are a great number of teens that are being coerced. We see it all the time. All the time, parents bringing teens in, and the teen is just like a deer in headlights.
Right.
Has no idea what's about to happen to her.
This is their support network. This is the people that are supposed to be helping them rather than taking them to a place to kill their children.
And instead of this being like the thing that solves the issue in their life, which is what they're being told, teens are 4 times higher. There's a 4 times higher risk of repeat abortions.
Yeah.
And that teens who abort are more likely to become pregnant again within the next few years.
Yeah.
And those who had an abortion at least 4 times more likely to have a repeat abortion.
Yeah. And
so it becomes the cycle.
Right, yeah. It lays a foundation for their life and kind of gets them caught in that cycle of death and destruction.
Yeah.
So, yeah, some heavy stuff for sure. But we hope that this article and what we've talked about informs you guys how to minister effectively to teens and how to just share this information that will help dissuade teenagers from thinking about abortion.
Yeah.
And so, you can definitely reach out to us if you want further information about this. Take advantage of this article. It's going to be on our Sidewalks for Life website, sidewalks4life.com. Check out our podcast website, gospelcenteredprolife.com. You can reach out to me, Daniel, at lovelife.org. You reach her, Vicky, with a Y, at lovelife.org. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, God bless.
God bless you all.
For love, give me an outlet for gratitude. I know it will cost me my life, but nothing's too precious since I met you.